Welcome back to Wine and Dine, the show about great food, great wine, and entertaining. I'm your host, Mark DeWolf. And in this tasty edition of Wine and Dine, brought to you by the Saltwire Network, we're going to be sampling New Zealand wines with local seafood. New Zealand wines are really popular these days, and for good reason. Not only do they taste great, but they're doing great things in the vineyard. They practice sustainability. Way back in 1994, the industry created the Sustainable Wine Growing New Zealand program. You know, some 25 plus years later, 95% of New Zealand wineries are participating, which exemplifies their commitment to the environment and how they're fighting against climate change. So it isn't just in the vineyard, it's in the winery. They're making some pretty good wine. So reds, you have Merlot, Syrah from Hawke's Bay. They have amazing Pinot Noir grown from across the country, but of course they're very famous for their white wines. May is the month to celebrate not only New Zealand white wine, but white wine in general. On May 6th, we have International Sauvignon Blanc Day. May 17th, we have International Pinot Gris Day. And May 21st, International Chardonnay Day. A great excuse to buy a bottle of New Zealand white, crack it open, and enjoy. Now, in a moment, we're going to be bringing on Dwayne McLeod. He's the executive chef of the RCR group. Dwayne's going to do a little demo on how to open and shuck an oyster, show us and talk a little bit about gravlax, and we're going to talk a little bit about the partnership New Zealand Wines has with RCR. So come right back. So welcome back to Wine and Dine. Now, of course, I'm joined by Chef Dwayne McLeod, and we're going to talk a little bit about the partnership that they have with Wines of New Zealand. They got a great concept going. There's going to be an at-home tasting on May 7th where you get to order some oysters or a gravlax platter from Shuck, and Wines of New Zealand is going to provide a box of 6 2-ounce samples of wine to go with them. So it's a great opportunity to kind of have an at-home tasting experience, some great wine, some great food, and on that evening, you'll have myself leading a Facebook tasting. We'll pop up the info on this video and tell you about how to order this incredible New Zealand wine and food tasting pack. So why is New Zealand wine great? Well, they do express their place. You know, the French have a great word for that called terroir, a word that means the climate, the soil, the cultural place. The New Zealand, the local Maori people have a great word for it too. Turongu Waiwai. I probably didn't pronounce that right, but I did my best. Anyway, they have the same concept about embracing their place, their environment, their culture, and they wrap it up into that word. So when we come back and talk about oysters, we're going to pair those up with some Sauvignon Blanc. That really represents a good part of the New Zealand wine industry. In fact, and much of that is coming from a place called Marlborough in South Island. About 90% of New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc comes from there. And we get a great style. Many of them are very exuberant, fresh, you know, ranging from grassy and tropical. Some are a little more restrained and austere, but they all have lively acidity. And it's lively acidity that's going to make a match with local oysters. You know, that salinity of the oyster is going to elevate the fruit, calm down the acidity of the wine. And the wine is actually going to bring out the meatiness and the flavor of the oyster. So come right back. Dwayne's going to shuck some oysters.
Hey guys, I'm going to teach you guys how to shuck an oyster. The oysters I'm using here today are Shandorf oysters. I get them from Aficionado, my local seafood supplier. And I'm going to show you how to shuck this in a very safe way and take your time. So first of all, the makeup of an oyster, where the curve is right here in the oyster, there's always a muscle that attaches the top and the bottom. This is what we want to remove the mantle on the top of the oyster. So one thing I teach people all the time is make sure your shucker is in a hinge properly and firmly. So once in the oyster, like really, really well, and like if it's really loose, try to be a bit more firmer. Have a good grip on the oyster. Other ways you can shuck the oysters is using a rag. Very comfortable in my hands. But what you want to do is make sure your oyster is in this hinge very firmly, and you want to turn it like a key. And you want to grab the top of the oyster like this a little bit with your pinky, and you want to ride the top of the shell till that abductor muscle right here and remove the top of the oyster. And then when you have your oyster shucked off the top, you got to clear it off the bottom. So underneath the bottom is that muscle, and you always want to slowly cut it away from you, and then your oyster is shucked. Another way you can shuck your oyster is through it with a rag. There's a bit more safer technique if you're not comfortable shucking your oysters. I like to fold it over the top a little bit like this. Same idea, just use it, get it in very firmly, and turn it like a key. And once it's popped up, again, I clean it, my oyster enough with my rag, pop the top up, grab it with your fingers a little bit, and cut the top of the oyster shell, just like that. Clean the top a little bit, just like that. And again, you want to remove the abductor muscle right here off this oyster. Just like that. I always tell my guys in the kitchen to always go one motion. Try not to hack it. You have a beautiful looking oyster. Oysters are very simple, can be a little intimidating, but once you feel an understanding of the makeup of it, another way you can do it is just popping it like a lever, and then kind of come in a little bit. Again, cut that top a little bit, ride the top, clean your oyster knife always so there's no sand and grime, and then there's your next oyster. With oysters, I find they can be a little harder, and that's where the rag technique really comes into play. Shucking them down on a table is a lot more safer than shucking in your hand. Clean your knives, and then away you go. Again, just keep on shucking. Make sure that your shucker is in that hinge. I can't stress that enough. And make sure it's in so you can kind of get into it and kind of turn it like a key lock. Some oysters are really, really difficult to open. So you want to keep it very simple. Put a little force into it and it'll still come off. And that's how you shuck an oyster. Welcome back, guys. I'm going to show you how to plate the salmon gravlax that we're offering as well for you guys. So here we have a little bit of gravlax, which is just salt cured fish. It's a way to preserve your fish and old times. So what we're going to do is it comes in a little bit of a rosette. Place that down for you. A little bit of a pickled red onion down as well too. Goes really well with salmon gravlax. It's a nice little acidic, just like that. A few pieces down. And then I got some nice little pea shoots from one of my local farmers that I kind of grow. And then after that, we got a little bit, just a little bit of fresh lemon we're going to squeeze over this, kind of just like a dressing, guys. And just like that, a little bit of lemon, just adds a little acid to the dish, makes it more bright and vibrant. This dish also goes really well with the New Zealand Pinot Gris as well too, guys.
Okay, I'm back, and that was an amazing dish created by Chef Dwayne, and a perfect pairing for New Zealand Pinot Gris. I think New Zealand Pinot Gris is so special. It's made more in the Alsatian style than what we call the Northern Italian style. That means they usually have a touch more texture, a little more aromatics like floral, pear, and spice. Perfect pairing for salmon gravlax. Now, New Zealand also makes some great Chardonnay, and they have some diversity of styles. So in the North Island, places like Hawke's Bay and Gisborne, they're a little riper and more tropical. As we move to the South Island, where it's typically a little bit cooler, you get a more citrusy style. For both sides, both areas, you know, I think the oak is usually well restrained and nicely comes together in the wine. So it can make for elegant Chardonnay. It's one of the best places in the world, honestly, to grow Chardonnay. As for what it can pair with, you know, I've got this dish with a crispy skinned salmon, some king mushrooms, and sitting on top of some risotto. I'll show you the recipe at the end of this video. So I want to take some time to thank Chef Dwayne for coming on. I'm really looking forward to this tasting that they're doing with Shuck and Wines of New Zealand. We'll pop up the information at the end of this video. So order your Shuck oysters or your Shuck gravlax, your New Zealand Wines tasting kit, and celebrate Sauvignon Blanc Day on May 7th. I've got the salmon in front of me. I'm going to pour a little Chardonnay. I'm going to toast the New Zealand wine industry, toast Chef Dwayne, toast RCR, and come back next week for another edition of Wined and Dined.